Hello, Internet Land. How are you? Been a while since I put a video up. Not that many of you maybe care, but I figured why not. This time I actually have a series for you. So, and what the series is about is, if you saw my first video, you'll see that it was a little playthrough of the rack, what I just finished wiring, and I was really happy with it for the first time. Like, yay, I made a rack. But after dealing with it for several months, I began to realize there were some pretty big design flaws in it. The biggest one was noise. The fact that I was dumb and ended up wiring the MIDI cables, the power cables, and the audio cables all together caused a lot of problems. You could even with the guitar volume off and on a high gain setting, you could hear the of the MIDI clock. Not exactly the nicest thing you want to hear when you're trying to record clean signals. Also, and there were just some other issues with it, like the shelf rack, the pull-out rack I had was a little too shallow, caused some problems being able to reach the pedals I had in the back. It was also, I had too many pedals to put in there, so everything was just crammed together, not in a very good way, so it caused problems trying to tweak settings on the back pedals. And then also, it was just a rat's nest. Like, I just didn't take any care in bundling the cables together, nor did I know how. So after thinking about it, I realized, well, the only way to solve these problems is to, unfortunately, tear the whole thing down and build it all again in a bigger rack case. So I figured, why not document it this time and share my experiences and the learning that I went through to figure out exactly what's the best way to do this. So you can see me tearing it down right here in wonderful fast motion. And then you also see that I made this lovely new intro for my videos. Okay, so now I have the old rack taken apart. It's time to get on with rack 2.0. Maybe it's more like rack 20.0 or maybe rack 50. Point is, it doesn't matter how many times I've tried to rebuild this rack. This is going to be the last one, and it's going to last. Said every guitarist ever. Okay, well, before getting on with building it, I wanted to go over some of the gear that I'm going to use to make the new rack, and let's get started. So first is, this is an SKB rotor rack. Very light, wonderful, 8 space instead of a 6 space, which is what I had prior, just because I needed the extra room. And you can't have a rack without power, so it's a Furman PL Plus DMC. These are fantastic units, they're built like tanks. This one's nice and quiet. And then the brain of the unit, if you will, which is a Fractal Audio Axe-Fx 2. I'm sure most of you out there know what this is. If you don't, get out from under a rock. No. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to do in the design of this rig is I wanted to maintain as much flexibility as possible in terms of, I wanted to run this either as a pure Axe-Fx rig or also to be able to use a real amp head and be able to control it with my MIDI controller and put the Axe-Fx into the effects loop of that amp. And then on top of that, I also have a small selection of like compressor, boost, and dry pedals that I like to use because I love the way they sound. So in order to control all that, we have the RJM Rack Gizmo. This is a wonderful unit. What it is 8 mono loops, also with an optional buffer, and has this thing called a click stopper circuit. So that way it helps to make sure that you get absolute silent switching, so there's no kind of pops or degradate or anything coming through in the signal due to buildup or whatnot. And then the other part of it is you have these 2 little DINs here. It says amp 1 and amp 2. And what they can do is, with a cable, you can get custom cables made, or you can make your own. You can plug this into your amp, and then you can control up to 8 functions of what that amp could control through its foot switch. So for example, I have a cable that could go from this to the back panel of the Bogner Ecstasy, and then I can control every single thing that the Ecstasy foot switch could control, but I can program it into my Mastermind GT22. So that way, this thing takes care of it all, and I don't have to worry about its foot switch. Okay, so let me go over some of the pedals that I use. First is, this is the Xotic SP Comp. I love this thing. It's amazing sounding compressor, it's compact, and the nice thing about it has this blend knob, so it allows you to actually get parallel compression out of a guitar pedal, which is all in one, which is fantastic. Second is the Xotic EP Booster. Back in the day, I guess, I've not done this myself personally, but I've read that guitarists would take an Echoplex and just use the drive, like the level section, to help use it to overdrive their amp, the front end of their amp. Well, they've recreated that into this little job right here, and it sounds amazing. Now, for an overdrive, for like low wattage overdrive and breakup, I use the Bogner Ecstasy Blue pedal. This pedal is fantastic. It not only sounds good, but it's one of the few overdrives I've played that actually feels like an amp. It's just incredible. He did an amazing job designing the circuit in this puppy. Highly recommend you try one if you're in the mood, if you're in the market for an overdrive. Now, along with those, I love Strymon, and I cannot say enough good things about these two pedals, which is the Timeline, one of their main delay pedal, and then the Big Sky, which is like their main reverb pedal. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the best sounding delay and reverb on the planet. I love the stuff in the Axe-Fx, but there's some mojo magic that these have. I just couldn't live without them. So I put these into the effects loop of the Axe-Fx. Now, you can't, can't have a nice unit without power. So of course, Voodoo Labs, they make fantastic units. Isolated taps, these have the high milliamp outputs I need for the Strymon, and enough taps for all the other pedals. Fantastic unit. What sucks is I had one of these already, and I sold it to get a smaller unit that I think was contributing to the noise in my system, only to buy it again. I'm sure no guitarist has ever rebought gear, ever, of course. And then this is something new I'm putting in this time, an ISP Decimator 2. So what this is going to do is control the noise coming straight from the guitar itself. So this will be the board, come into the rack, first thing it's going to hit this, and then go into the rack gizmo and go through the rest of the pedals. And then if I want to run a dual noise gate system, I'll just use the noise gate into the Axe-Fx, and then that way I can turn it on and off however I need it. Now, one of the other issues I was having was I was getting some MIDI ghosting. Meaning just I'd hit and either a unit would wig out and flip to the wrong patch, or something would switch on its own. And what I've heard from talking to some people in the field, they've said that, yeah, there's a problem where as you daisy chain units, the MIDI signal can degrade itself. So in order to avoid that, you get this little sucker. And what it is I'm going to take the MIDI, come out of the Mastermind, it's going to go straight into the Axe-Fx, so that way you get the bidirectional communication. Then out of the Axe-Fx into this. And this not only cleans up the MIDI signal, but then it sends out 4 copies of that signal as a through. So that way, all the 2 Strymon units in the rack gizmo are each going to get like a clean MIDI signal just for themselves, and that will solve my MIDI problems, I hope. Now, you got to have a place to mount all these in your rack, and for that, I got new rack shelves. The previous rack shelf I got, one of the problems with it is it had this lip all the way around it. So I was then losing like about 1 inch or more due to that lip, just on both axes, the way it was shaped. This one, not that way. Obviously these are thin, flat lips on the side. This one's a really short one for the front. You need something you can grab it and pull it out by. I'm not a fan of the big lip on the back. I really wish it didn't have it, but this is also one of the few rack shelves I found that actually had full extension ability. And what I mean by that is, so my previous rack, and a lot of the other ones I've seen, the rack itself will only come out about yay far. So it's a 14-inch depth. You only get about 9 inches extension on it. This one can actually go all the way out. So this, I'll be able to extend the entire drawer outside of the rack and have full access to it, which is good because in the previous drawer, there were pedals I had in the back, and if I ever wanted to adjust them, I had to walk around to the back of the rack with a flashlight and like try to play the guitar and reach in and like turn the dial. It's not good. Now, also, I'm a fan of rack systems, LA Sound Design, Custom Audio Electronics. They make amazing racks, and just seeing the pictures of what their stuff and how nice and tied down everything is with custom input jacks and everything, I'm trying to emulate that as best I can with this build. So of course, got the tie down pads, you know, whole bag full of them, along with tie down straps and stuff like that to get that going. And then this is going to be one thing that I'm hoping will turn out to be really useful, is it's a way to make your own patch panel on the back. So these are just, it's Neutrik D size connectors. This will go on the back of the rack itself, and then inside of it, you just put all kinds of different connectors that you need. So for example, this is a USB pass-through. Now I have to you can flip it, which I'll have to do, but what it'll allow me to do is, instead of having to constantly plug the USB cable into the Axe-Fx, I'll just have one cable that goes from this to the Axe-Fx, and I'll plug in and out of the jack. It just saves wear and tear on the jacks in the unit themselves, and it's just also easier, so you're not constantly reaching into the rack to try and find stuff, especially when it's dark or unlit or whatever. And one of the other things are these little suckers, and these are wonderful. This is a Switchcraft jack. It's a stereo version. They also make a mono. As I said earlier, I wanted to be able to run the Axe-Fx either in the effects loop of an amp or straight up by itself. But I also have all the pedals coming out of the rack gizmo, which would need to maintain being in front of the Axe-Fx, whether I use the Axe-Fx by itself or those pedals would have to go in front of the amp. So enter this little puppy. Two of them, actually. So what I'll do is I'm going to mount two of these on the board, and it has what's called a normally closed terminal on it. And what that means is I'll take the signal coming out of the rack gizmo, wire it into the back of this, take the normally closed circuit, wire it into the normally closed second of the other jack, and then take that jack, the output of that jack, and then put it to the input of the Axe-Fx. And what that means is, as long as nothing is plugged into these jacks, the signal will go from the rack gizmo through back to the Axe-Fx. But if I ever need to run into an amp, then I plug a jack in. Then the moment I plug a jack into this, it breaks the connection, and now the signal will go from rack gizmo to the front of the amp. And then I can take the effects send of the amp, plug it into the other jack, which will now route that signal to go into the Axe-Fx, and then I'll have two more jacks for the unbalanced output, or for the unbalanced output, to send one of them back to that amp, and then I can send one to another amp if I want to actually run stereo amplifiers for whatever reason in a live situation or something. So that just keeps it nice and clean. I don't have to constantly reshuffle cables. I'm not putting extra wear and tear on the jacks and stuff like that, etc. And that, I believe, is about it. So now it's time to build this sucker.